Secretary, would you like to call the roll? Here. 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 Here.
Here.
City staff, we have Planner Alvarez,
Here. Yep.
and Community Development Director Harrington.
Here. And then our new attorney, Tony Chubb, will also be joining us virtually this evening. Troubleshooting that specific issue at the moment.
Good
You
evening,
can hear
guys.
us.
Can you hear me? Can you guys hear me?
Oh, yeah. Hey, Tony.
Perfect. Hey, Mayor. I can recognize your voice, but I can't see you.
Is there a motion to approve the agenda as distributed?
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passed. Is there a motion to approve the previous meeting minutes? Correct. Is there a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Citizen comments. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time and make comments. The person is requested but not required to state their name and address for the record. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person, and this citizen comment period will be limited to a total of 45 minutes. There will be another comment period during the unfinished business. So, unfinished business. We have an application from Martin Stoneman of Compassionate Advisors for a special land use in the C3 district from Appendix A, Article 4, Section 4.04, parentheses 13, for a medical marijuana processing center and a preliminary site plan remodeling the existing 1,760 square foot suite within the structure to create a retail space at 813 West Michigan, Saline, 48176. Parcel 18-01-325-016. There's a memo from Planner Arbach. Would you like to?
Sure, thank you. So my name is Mike Auerbach with Carlisle Wortman Associates, the city's planning consultants. You have a copy of our review in your packet, which is an addendum to our initial review of this application. Again, the request is for preliminary site plan and special land use approval for a medical marijuana provisioning center. The commission first reviewed this application at the July 13th, 2022 regular meeting. Following public hearings and discussion, the commission approved the preliminary site plan with the condition that the land use will not increase any existing nonconformities, and that parking and access issues will be addressed administratively prior to final site plan approval. In addition, the commission had asked the applicant to provide more information about the anticipated parking demand. Since that time, they've submitted a parking study prepared by an engineering firm whose name I won't try to butcher, that gives estimates of the anticipated parking, both from the medical marijuana provisioning center itself and the other uses on site. They've also addressed some of the comments or concerns we had with the site plan raised in our initial review. So the addendum just speaks to the additional information that they've provided. But as a reminder, so the special uses need to be approved according to specific criteria in the zoning ordinance listed in section 905. And in order for the preliminary site plan approval to be valid, it's contingent on the special land use approval as well. So one of the items we had called out in our review, the applicants confirmed that the customer entrance will face the parking lot, and the final site plan will need to specify where the deliveries will be received and that sort of thing. Also, they'll need to provide that information also to obtain a license from the city if their site plan is approved. The primary concerns that we had with the site plan had to do with the number of parking spaces available on site, as well as the dimensions of the drive aisle. and the approach. As we mentioned, it wasn't clear in the site plan that the plan was showing the existing conditions on site or if they were proposed improvements. So we asked that to be clarified, and based on the last review, those updates can be provided with the final site plan. As far as the anticipated parking demand, the traffic study uses estimates in the ITE, or Institute of Traffic Engineers manual, which is a fairly conventional way to estimate parking. That study shows that at its peak between the provisioning center and the other uses on site, that there will be a maximum of 29 vehicles parked on site at a peak hour of 5 p.m., potentially to 8 p.m. So in addition to so as far as parking demand itself is concerned, this does give at least an estimate of the anticipated parking needs on site. Although there could be some additional information provided about the parking demand that each use generates. However, it's come to our attention that staff has reviewed the city's records for this site and found that it was approved originally for development in 1978 with the property to the south, and that it was approved on the condition that there be a shared parking agreement between the two, and that each site would be able to utilize the parking on the other, meaning that there's a total, or at least based on that initial approval of, I believe it was 120 spaces that were available between the two sites. And so there have likely been some modifications since that time. However, if the applicant provides a copy of that parking agreement showing that they can utilize the parking spaces on the property to the south, that would be much closer to the city's current requirement. So it would first be a legal non-conforming strip mall and parking. And in addition, it would make the availability of parking much less of a concern, there being so much on that site to the south. Given that it's still unclear how many, since the configuration of the parking at 813 has changed since that original approval. As we mentioned, the access drive is shown to be much wider, and there is some slight encroachment into the parking spaces on the west side of the lot, both by pole lights and landscaping. It's not clear how many parking spaces are actually available on that site. So we would recommend that the existing conditions be more accurately defined in the final site plan, and if the applicant does intend to provide any improvements, that those be identified as well. As far as the anticipated demand, like I mentioned, we expect, the study shows that there would be a peak of 29 vehicles on site at a given time. We would recommend, this wasn't in our review, but given how few spaces there are at 813 itself, the commission could consider a condition of approval that staff be required to park at 783 West Michigan, the property to the south, to leave spaces on the 813 property open for patrons just to avoid any traffic issues. It's likely that the drive aisle on the 813 site was originally approved with a 22-foot width, which in our assessment, if that were maintained, wouldn't pose any circulation or traffic issues. There's plenty of communities in our experience do allow for 22-foot wide drive aisles. We don't see any issues there. The only concern being the width of the access drive and the spaces closest to Michigan Ave. We would recommend either some maybe additional landscaping or some kind of buffer to shield or protect spaces in that area from those vehicles if that's how the applicant chooses to proceed. Of course, they also have the option not to propose any parking improvements as a part of this application, the special use just being for the provisioning center itself. So in total, based on the information provided, we don't anticipate any issues with the number of available parking spaces, given the expected parking demand, as long as the applicant does provide verification that they can utilize the parking at the site to the south.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Of course. Yeah, I have a few. Looking at table 2 on your, from the Fleece Vanderbrink document, it indicates that there's a shortage of 45 position, or parking spaces. Can you explain and clarify that a little bit more?
Table 2 in our review?
No, not in yours, but
Oh,
Vanderbrink, associated with what you were just recommending.
sure, give me just a moment.
Which page, Mr. Gearbox?
Page 3, I believe, of the document, table 2.
Table 2. So this was their comparison of the number of spaces that would be required by the Saline zoning ordinance versus what the ITE estimates of parking demand would be by use. So the ITE manual gives usually some kind of use-specific multiplier, usually based on square footage of, based on the size of a building and a specific use, how many vehicles would be parked there at a given time. So these, the ITE parking demand is based on the square footage of each space. I'm not sure if this is peak demand, but that either during a certain time, that these are the number of spaces that vehicles would be expected to be parked in association with each use. And so what they're saying here is that the Saline zoning ordinance requires more parking than what these estimates would show as needed.
And how do you feel about what they were using as comparables? One example was a health fitness instead of an actual assessment of what the use is currently as a dance studio. Part of my concerns are the hours are different than what would be assumed in a, a standard document, I guess.
Sure. So the use they selected, the private fitness studio, did seem to be the closest to a dance studio based on the uses that are included in the IT manual. It would take, I could research that further, but in the general description in the manual, it specifies it's distinct from a gym that uses under that ITE classification usually involve private membership in classes. There could be room for debate about how closely that fits the dance studio, but it did seem to be among the closest, or the closest comparable use, at least in the ITE manual. Again, it is just an estimate. It could be that the dance studio's operation is different, but as far as that classification that they chose for this study did seem to be the closest. By comparison, we had also looked at estimates for a daycare center. The similarities there being a specific time of day where a number of vehicles stop to drop off or pick up attendees. While not apples to apples, I believe there was less parking demand associated with daycare centers. So you can certainly request further study, but the comparison they selected wasn't inappropriate by our assessment.
This is more of a desk analysis versus actual analysis on site, correct?
That's right.
And then the last question I just had, none of this takes into consideration parking on the street, correct?
It does not.
There are concerns of parking that occurs on the boulevard, I believe, potentially causing issues that may need to be looked in earlier. So as long as that does not consider that, I want to make sure. Thank you.
I guess I had a question, maybe it's Mr. Harrington. Why is the Saline parking formula so much different from the ITE?
Mr. Auerbach could also probably provide input into that. It's not untypical for especially suburban or rural communities, which I would say fit Saline probably the best, to have exorbitantly high parking requirements. So, I mean, 1 per 100 is relatively high usually, I would say. Usually, like the minimum standard you would see is probably about 1 for 250. So it's not anything against Saline, but usually suburbs and rural municipalities require higher amounts of parking due to the lack of street parking or the concerns of congestion, or just a neighborhood appeal. People like to park where they want to go, not on the street. So that's probably the genesis for that, but I don't have any specific rationale for you about why ours is so much higher than not only the one in the parking study, but probably neighboring municipalities as well, which Mike could probably speak better to, given his work in other communities.
The ITE manual is, they are just estimates, not necessarily a best practice. Even as this review mentions that to avoid congestion or to make sure enough parking is available, depending on the use, you would want a certain percentage of more spaces available than just the number generated in their parking demand. The ITE manual also shows the error in some of their estimates. For example, they caution that the estimate for dispensaries should be taken or used with a grain of salt, just because there's still, it's not based on very many samples and has a somewhat high margin of error. But so they're, yeah, in short, the ITE demand estimates are perhaps a different thing than what a zoning ordinance requires. Be considered separately. There's reasons for requiring more or less.
Are there any other questions?
So you received a letter that has attached to it a proposed cross easement for parking. I know that was one of the things that was suggested as needed. Has anybody reviewed that as to whether it would be adequate if signed and recorded?
Yeah, so I forwarded it to our attorney. It has been signed. I received a signed copy of it this morning. I believe the applicant can speak to recording. I'd have to look at the email to know if it's being recorded as we speak or in the process or being submitted soon. I did not identify any issues looking over it, but I am not the one to speak to whether an easement is viable. But granted, our applicant has attorneys with them. I'm sure that it would not submit something insufficient. But if Mr. Chubb would like to speak to that, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Harrington. Yeah, so the only concern that I have, well, I have two concerns. The first is that it's not recorded, as Mr. Harrington mentioned. But the other bigger concern is paragraph number 6, amendments, does allow it to be terminated at any time by the agreement of the two property owners, and the applicant is not a property owner. And so the document is fine, but I think that if we are going to approve the special land use and the site plan based upon this easement, there needs to be a special condition that if the easement is revoked at any time while the dispensary is still operating, then the special land use and the site plan, are subject to immediate review or revocation.
Tony, this is, Mr. Chairman, if I may. Perhaps we could take a step back. This is your first official Planning Commission meeting, and you've been with the City of Saline, I think, for about a month now. For the Planning Commission's benefit and for those in the audience or who may be watching this at home, do you want to take 30 seconds just to introduce yourself to the group?
Yeah, thank you so much, Mayor. Yes, so I'm Tony Chubb. I'm a partner with Gianmarco Mullins and Horton. We're about a 60 lawyer firm based in Lansing and Troy. I've been with the firm about 6 years in the municipal group. I exclusively defend municipalities. I currently serve as the city attorney for Saline, Pontiac, East Lansing, the city of Wayne, Redford Township, Royal Oak Township, and Genesee County 911, and I work as special counsel on certain municipal issues for a number of other communities in Metro Detroit. Previous to being at the firm, I was in-house here in the beautiful city of Flint, where I was the chief legal officer for a number of years, previously the deputy chief legal officer, and prior to that, I was in-house for the Metro Detroit Transit Authority, known as SMART, So in all, I've been practicing law about 14 years, all of it in-house in governmental entities or at my firm, but solely representing governmental entities.
Very good. Thank you, Tony. And we're, on behalf of myself and my council colleagues and staff, we're delighted to work with Tony, and you'll see his partner at the firm, John, from time to time as well. But he's just been doing phenomenal work thus far, and we expect great things in the years ahead. Thanks for being with us tonight, Tony.
Of course, thank you, Mayor.
Is there a motion to acknowledge receipt of the memo from Planner Auerbach?
I'll move to acknowledge.
All those, excuse me, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passed. At this time, would like the applicant to come up and tell us a little about the project.
Yeah, good evening, Commissioner. Thank you for your time this evening. My name is Sam Kilberg from Daycare. I represent Compassion Advisors LLC. And, we'd like to thank staff. We've been working with the staff, since the last meeting on this parking issue. If you do recall at the last meeting, we were supposed to come back and look at the parking issue, and that's really exactly what we've done. We had a traffic study prepared and sent to staff, and we have looked at the site plan and been in communication regularly on the parking issue. And so what we have found with the parking study is that we need 29 spaces, and, we have that parking on site. We do agree with the conditions set forth that, we need to have the existing conditions looked at again. In fact, I was just talking to my client, that's going to actually be walked next week where someone will be out measuring. So we have no problem with that being a condition that the final site plan will show exactly what the existing conditions are. As you'll see in the proposed parking, we are proposing parking on the east side. I know one of the comments earlier was that, parking on the street, the entrance to the facility will be on the east side where all the parking is. And so I think it's important to remember is if you've been to the site now, there is no striped parking. It's, it's kind of an open asphalt area. And if you look on Google, which I provided a photograph on Google, you'll see people are parking actually back by the dumpsters. And so really it's the proposed parking that we are going to do is going to actually enhance the site. And so it'll be much more organized with people parking on the east side in the striped lanes. The plan is to repave, restripe the whole thing. And so that will really provide help for this parking. Based on the study, based on staff's recommendation, there is ample parking on site. Additionally, as was noted, we have the signed agreement. I was able to print off a copy. This is ready to be recorded. I just spoke with my client. We are fine with a condition under 6 that if it's revoked, then special land use would be threatened. That's kind of outside of our control as we are a tenant in the building. We're not an owner, so we don't actually have the authority to enter into these easements. I just think it's important to note that historically, as staff pointed out, this was actually already supposed to be in place. So back when the site plan was originally approved for this site, there was supposed to be cross-access. So upon learning that, we got together with the owner of the property, and it just so happens that this kind of informal agreement has always existed because the owner of 813 West and 783 are actually family. So those neighboring properties are family. So we worked together, and that was signed. We have a signed copy that we're going to work to record. Based on the traffic study that we have provided, based on the shared parking agreement and the proposed plan, there should be more than enough ample parking, which was the concern of this commission. We feel that we've satisfied those requirements and that we are ready for approval and to move on to final site plan and to work to get that to you. We're here if you have any questions or concerns.
Will there be signage telling the patrons of 813 that there's more parking sort of down below in the shared parking access?
I don't think at this time there's any intention to have signs. However, if you look at the asphalt actually meets together, it's kind of, it almost looks like one parking lot. So I think naturally people would just park at the nearest opening spot to walk across. Is kind of the intention. If at any time we determine that signage is needed, or if the city, if you determine that we should put signage, we're open to work on that idea as well.
So someone suggested having employees actually park in the cross easement area. Has that been considered?
It can be considered. I think do we have, yeah, I think it's a good idea. I don't think we have any problem with that.
Thank you. Just one more quick question. From what I'm reading in the easement, do I understand correctly that it benefits all businesses at 813?
Correct, yeah. So because the owner is signing it, so it's an action easement for the parcel at 813 and 783, which This actually corrects the site plan for the property. This was supposed to already be in place, so I'm happy that this is being done. But it's a shared parking access and ingress egress easement.
Okay, thank you.
This time I'll entertain a motion to open the floor for citizen comments.
Actually, it's not necessary, Mr. Chair.
In
Just
that
comments,
case-
just comments and questions from the planning commission.
I have a question. So I think we were reminded that we already approved a preliminary site plan.
No, that was a mistake.
Okay,
It
all
has
right.
not been
I
approved. It
didn't
was
remember
fully
that either,
tabled,
but
SLU, yeah.
I got it. Thank you.
Just in discussions, I think I'd like to see what's being recommended by our city attorney to make sure that the easement is properly recorded with the potential of a revocation clause in it. I'd also like to make sure that we do have signage in place directing where individuals are to go in the event of overflow, because I think that will be confusion at this point, so that they aren't parking onto the street. Those are my recommendations at this time.
Was that, just to clarify, was it his suggestion that it be in the easement or simply be subject to our approval, or a condition of our approval?
It should be a condition of the easement, because I know families, and families can get into disagreements, and so we're going to make sure this is properly recorded, and it runs with this special land use. It needs to be properly recorded so that the protection is there for both the city and for the applicant.
So, Mr. Gilbert, are you asking legal counsel then how those concerns would be worded in the subsequent motions?
Correct.
Okay. Did you hear that, Tony?
Yeah, I think I heard most of it. So, the thing about the easements and making it wholly irrevocable is almost really impossible. The solution I mentioned that Mr. Kilbert seemed to say that his client was fine with is because the property owners of both properties are not the applicant, the special land use approval and the site plan approval would both be subject to immediate review and revocation if the easement was subsequently revoked.
So if I'm understanding correctly, in that case, it would not require a modification of the recorded easement? That would just be part of the site plan, or excuse me, the special use conditions?
Yeah, that's correct.
And you feel that's sufficient for us at this point in time? Should the property be sold or split or anything like that? That's for you, Tony, sorry.
Okay, yeah, because it would be done, so the idea is that at any time that the easement is revoked, now it wouldn't necessarily matter if it was sold because the property easements run with the land. The current owners at the time, both current owners have to agree to it to be terminated, and then it can be removed from the deeds. So the idea would be that at any time that happened, that the easement is terminated, then the site plan approval and the special land use approval would be subject to immediate review and revocation.
Thank you. And then the other issue was signage, but I don't know how best I'd let staff make that determination of where place where the signage would be on the site plan.
Specifically for the driveway, or?
To direct traffic to wherever the additional spaces are, because that is always going to be a concern. If they don't know where to go, they're going to try and park somewhere else.
I'm happy to work with the applicant on that. I don't think that's going to be a huge barrier for either them or us in terms of coming up to a solution for that.
So we have a motion on the floor to recommend to city council to approve, not approve, or approve with conditions the application. Is there a is there? Motion?
The motion, my comments were recommendations as we
Yes.
talked about this.
Is there a motion? Is there a I will move to recommend approval with conditions. Is there a second?
Point to parliamentary procedure, can you actually make a motion, Mr. Chair? Okay, I'll defer to the mayor on that.
I'll second that.
Yes. A motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
So I'm not opposing, but did we specify the conditions?
Go ahead, Ben.
So first condition was proper signage for parking, I think, so we're all on the same page here. Another condition was the proper dimensions of the parking lot at 863, or which I have to mix the addresses here now too, I can pull it up.
813.
813, there you go. Sorry, I have a whole. Anyhow, 813, to have the proper dimensions for the final site plan for both parking lots, or all parking lots that are intended to be used for the specific site.
So those are the conditions we would recommend, those that were included, and Ben actually corrected me that the same conditions that were proposed at the previous meeting, that the parking, any improvements not increase the existing nonconformities, and that, I'm looking for the language, that a parking and access will be addressed by staff and consultants prior to final site plan approval. The condition that the directional signage be included, and that staff parking for the provisioning center be at the property to the south. I think some of the discussion was whether those conditions would be included in the actual easement, in which case they wouldn't necessarily have to be a part of the special land use approval, but you could specify them in the conditions on the special land use.
I think it was Tony's opinion that they should be included in the SLU rather than the easement, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct, Mayor. Thank you.
So if I may, Mr. Chairman, if you're still comfortable making that motion with the enumerated conditions and Mr. Beardsley is amenable to seconding that, I would call for the vote one more time, just so that we're clear that everyone's on the same page.
Do we want to clarify that wording? I mean, because I heard our attorney talk about review and revocation, but I didn't hear that in Mr. Arbach's.
Right. So
Comments.
that was the last one. So there's a handful of conditions here that are hard to keep track of. So then the final condition would then be the site plan and the SLU are subject to review and revocation should the shared parking easement be terminated.
I'm in agreement with that.
So am I. But before we vote, can I ask the clerk to read the
Well, there's not an amendment, it's just with the conditions.
with conditions?
That were articulated by our planning consultant or community development director.
Because that's on your review, isn't it?
Yes, some of them are and some of them aren't exactly. So we will write them down, but, okay, so,
Yeah, perhaps to walk through, it would be worth taking the time now to spell them out. Is there a condition, is it approval conditioned on the parking agreement being recorded?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
The other is land use will not increase any nonconformities with existing parking, and parking and access will be addressed by staff and consultants prior to final site plan approval. The next condition is that I could suggest is that employees of the provisioning center employees shall park on the property to the south, whichever the address is, 783 West Michigan. And that proposal for directional signage will be submitted and approved administratively by city staff prior to final site plan approval. Those would be the conditions I suggest.
And
And
that the approval of this special land use and site plan would be subject to review and revocation if the easement were terminated.
And should that be included in the easement itself?
I believe we concluded that it does not need to be in the actual easement that's recorded.
Okay.
so just officially for the record, here we go. So the first condition is that the parking easement shall be recorded with the county and executed as well. The second condition is that the land use will not increase nonconformity with parking. The third condition is that employees shall park on 783 West Michigan Avenue, or the lot that is at 783 West Michigan Avenue, We would like to see a proposal for directional signage, which can be approved administratively by staff prior to the final site plan. And then lastly, we'd like the approval of the site plan or SLU to be contingent on the easement that is currently existing for, or the easement, the proposed easement for shared parking. And should such an easement be terminated, it is open for revocation and review of the site plan and SLU that we would be approving at the final site plan.
Okay. All those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you.
We do have a subsequent motion to approve with conditions the application for preliminary site plan remodeling at the existing suite in the structure to create a retail space at 813 West Michigan.
That's,
Point of clarification,
Yes.
is that preliminary or final?
preliminary.
All
Preliminary.
It's all preliminary.
Preliminary.
This is the SLU, and then usually they're approved together, though. We've been
moved.
They were enumerated on the agenda as separate motions.
Okay.
Mr. Fosdick, excuse me. Mr. Fosdick moved to approve. Scott, excuse me, is that with conditions?
Yes.
And I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Good luck. Are there any other discussion items?
I'll move to excuse the absence of Vice Chair Young.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Is there motion to adjourn at 7:38?
So moved.
All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes, meeting adjourned.